AAA games are of course here to stay, and just like everyone else, I love indulging in the latest big blockbuster. But I also concede that AAA games can be a risky investment, what with them often being hundreds of hours long, pretty darn pricey, and sometimes just completely botched at launch. So with this in mind, today we're casting our eye to the AA games. Those are lower production titles, those lower cost games that have just as much to offer as the biggest blockbusters. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 AA video games you need to play. Number 10, Hi-Fi Rush. Closing Tango Gameworks will go down as one of the biggest blunders of Phil Spencer's time in charge of Xbox. Though the studio was relatively young, only releasing a handful of games, it had proven itself as one of the most promising and diverse rising talents. After a wobbly debut with The Evil Within, the team followed it up with one of the most inventive and confident sequels from the past decade with The Evil Within 2, a game which, in a just world, would have sold millions of copies. It was Hi-Fi Rush which teased the studio's true capabilities though. Moving away from M-rated horror shoot-em-ups, this smaller title, shadow dropped on Game Pass, was a more colourful, cel-shaded rhythm action game where the beat of the music informed your character's combat prowess. With strong comedy writing, memorable boss battles, and a striking aesthetic, Hi-Fi Rush was an injection of adrenaline on Game Pass, a proof of concept that the huge developers Microsoft had acquired could take risks on new, smaller, more experimental titles to bolster the service. Unfortunately, as we know now, that approach wasn't to be, but at least we still have this game that will stand the test of time. Number 9, Indika. While all of the games on this list are broadly recommendable, Indika, by design, is not for everyone. There's nothing quite like this story-driven esoteric game where you play as an adventuring nun warring with her faith. Set in a surreal alt-history Russia, where animals are the size of houses and the freezing expanses of the country's wilderness make a trip to the closest town a Kafka-esque nightmare, this strange adventure title has you take control of the titular character as you meet up with troubled convicts, reckon with your past, and try to navigate a world which rarely makes any sense. Texturally, its closest comparison is probably Hellblade in terms of its character-centric gameplay and horror-inspired presentation, and while its story is similarly as weighty and psychological, there is one key difference. Indika is funny. Blending humor with horror, this is a game that keeps you on your toes, moving from one gameplay idea and set piece to the next. Its purposefully abrasive content won't click with every player, but those on its wavelength are in for a treat. Number 8, Amnesia the Bunker. Amnesia the Bunker is the perfect example of how to take an established franchise and push it in an entirely new direction. Now, full disclosure here, I've never actually been a huge Amnesia guy. Its hide-and-seek gameplay and period settings have never had much draw to my horror tastes, but the changes the bunker makes to the core concept have finally made me a fan. This time around, there's a much larger focus on survival horror gameplay. The core idea is you play as a soldier trapped in an abandoned World War I bunker that's being terrorized by an invading monster. It's your job to explore the underground caverns and find a way to escape. What keeps that goal intense though is the constant resource management. You need to keep the generator at the game's one save point full of gas if you want to keep exploring with the lights on, which makes the monster less likely to appear. Your limited ammo for a revolver and slow reloading constantly has you weighing up whether to use a shot as a tool, i.e. shooting a lock off a door, or as an offensive measure to make the monster itself retreat, while other scavenged items similarly have multiple uses as you map out the most efficient way around the base. This interplay of incredible atmosphere, setting a horror game in a World War I bunker is in and of itself genius, and gameplay that encourages thinking outside the box and experimentation makes it an amazing survival horror experience. Number 7, Pacific Drive. Pacific Drive is for freaks like me who loved sorting out their briefcases in Resident Evil 4. Taking place in a wilderness walled off from the rest of civilization that's home to extreme storms and otherworldly phenomena, this survival title tasks you with going out on runs deeper and deeper into the world with only a rust bucket of a car for protection. If you're playing well though, it won't stay a rust bucket for long, as the game's core loop has you going into the hazardous parts of the zone to hopefully bring back loot and resources that can improve your vehicle and make it more durable to endure deeper runs against even more potent dangers. That risk-reward gameplay is fundamental to the experience. The anxiety of wondering whether to evacuate back to camp while you can, or push on in the hopes of increasing the loot load, makes each run as stressful as the last. No doubt resulting in as many runs where you return to the garage with no doors or wheels as you do a boot full of goodies. It's in kitting out your car with defenses though, extra tires, enhanced bodywork, headlights that consume less battery, and being prepared that makes the loop so satisfying, as you slowly create a roaming tank that returns from the fray with nary a scratch. Throw in an eerie, mysterious plot on top of that loop and you have one of the biggest surprises and best surprises of the year. Number 6, Returnal. Ah, my beloved Returnal, a game so good that it opened my eyes to an entire genre. As an early PS5 exclusive, Returnal followed an astronaut named Celine who finds herself trapped on an alien planet and in a time loop. Hey, what can I say? 2021 was just huge for Groundhog Day style gaming stories. Your goal is to push through the different biomes in order to find a way off the planet, but every time you die, you're back to the beginning. There are enough persistent mechanics which maintain the sense of progression even on failed runs though, as leveling up weapons, defeating bosses, and gaining familiarity of the enemies and biomes, not to mention the developments in the narrative itself, all make subsequent attempts that little bit easier and that little bit more satisfying. Each area is vividly imagined as well, often with unique enemies and dangers that really drive home the Lovecraftian horror of the alien planet you're on. Audio tapes and remnants of an old civilization slowly unveil the larger story, which is at once cosmic in scale but deeply personal to Celine's past. It's the third-person combat that makes it a game you don't want to put down though. It's challenging, fast-paced, and demands some pixel-perfect responses, but in terms of pure combat rhythm, it's up there with Doom as some of the finest on console. Number 5, Helldivers 2. Helldivers 2 is easily the biggest surprise of 2024. The PC and PS5 game has outsold titans like Marvel's Spider-Man 2, all on the back of delivering the unthinkable, a live service game that actually respects the player. Though there were some quibbles at launch and Sony's attempt to restrict the game afterwards threatened the status quo, Helldivers, an archaic third-person co-op shooting, provides action movie-worthy set pieces in virtually every round, as players team up to make use of extreme ordnance to keep the alien threat at bay. While the gameplay itself is silky smooth and full of spectacle, it's the wider framing of the ongoing conflict that makes Helldivers so special. Keeping the game fresh with updates that are conveyed in-universe, the meta of Helldivers multiplayer is constantly changing, throwing up new surprises for players to tackle. It's a real joy of a game to be a part of, and one that looks like it's only going to get better going forward. Number 4, The Medium. Bloober Team is an understandably controversial developer. While they've created some popular titles, namely the Layers of Fear games, they've also struggled to create a truly exceptional experience so far. That said, The Medium comes damn close. Swapping the team's usual first-person perspective for an old-school third-person survival horror camera position, The Medium hinges around a core idea: swapping between two different realities to solve puzzles and progress through the story. Though we've seen similar gimmicks implemented in Titanfall 2 and Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, it feels right at home in a horror game. Moving from reality to a demonic hellscape keeps players on their toes, even when they're exploring, never mind when they're being chased through levels by beastly monstrosities. Though the story doesn't quite do the complex subject matter justice, just to be as vague as possible to avoid spoilers, there is an overall strong sense of focus and artistic direction that keeps The Medium entertaining for the long haul. Here's hoping and praying and keeping every finger and toe and everything else crossed that Silent Hill 2 improves on the solid foundations here. Number 3, Sifu. Sometimes you just want to sit back, relax, and kick someone in the head so hard that they go flying through a nearby window. Not just in real life, but in video games too. And unfortunately, the martial arts subgenre and melee combat innovation in general has kind of taken a backseat this generation. Sifu, however, brings it back into the focus in a sublime way. Putting the player through multiple gauntlets and boss battles, Sifu isn't exactly a power fantasy. It's a tough game, requiring you to memorize combos, learn your opponent's movesets, and have quick reactions to counter incoming blows. But while you'll initially find yourself eating pavement, you will soon come to master its ways, running through enemies with the nonchalance of Neo in the opening of The Matrix Reloaded. This is a stylish action game that's way more fully realized and content-rich than you may have thought. The levels are excellent, the bosses are tough, and you can even use a bow staff. Hey, what's not to like? Number 2, Lies of P. You know, you would be forgiven for missing Lies of P last year. A Pinocchio-themed Souls-like from a developer that doesn't even have a Wikipedia page at the time of writing makes for a project understandably treated with skepticism. But developers NeoWiz Games and Round 8 Studios proved everyone wrong by delivering the single greatest Souls-like title not made by From Software. With a Bloodborne-esque gothic horror setting and frantic, challenging combat, Lies of P, from its very first level, is noticeably a cut above the competition in terms of polish and presentation. The enemy design successfully taps into the potential of its gonzo story framing, throwing one mechanical puppet abomination after another at the player, alongside some infested creatures to boot. These beasties feel as good to fight as they are to look at as well, with diverse combat styles demanding the player's proficiency with a blade, as well as dodging and parrying. It's the boss battles that are Lies of P's easy standout feature though. As visually memorable as the most iconic FromSoft opponents, pretty much any one of the extensive boss encounters in this game poses a tantalizing challenge for even veterans of the subgenre. Most often being two-phase bouts as standard, they demand a lot from the player, but constantly offer up incredible sequences and spectacle. If you're a fan of this genre, honestly, you cannot miss Lies of P. I cannot believe how good this thing was. Number 1, RoboCop Rogue City. Oh god, honestly, I can hear Scott Hilford banging on the door to talk about this game. He never shuts up about it. I'm just gonna retreat and let him talk about it. Just let him go.
Finally, RoboCop Rogue City absolutely effing owned, and anyone who hasn't played it needs to check it out. Sick of the same old AAA build that preys upon your free time to extract more money with less rewards? RoboCop doesn't do that. Sick of the same style of Disney-fied writing that's just pure cringe at this point? RoboCop doesn't do that either. Just want to literally throw motorcycles at people while choking gangsters, popping heads, and exploring perfectly sized mini-open worlds? RoboCop does do that. Even its dissection of who Alex Murphy is, which parts of him are still human, whether that gives him rights as a person or a police officer, are threaded throughout the game in really neat choice-based dialogue scenes. The control scheme too, simply because you're controlling a walking tank, swaps out standard things like sprinting and sliding to give you a shoulder charge, slow motion toggle, armor enhancements, and much more. If we're talking about what it should feel like to embody a character in a video game, that pure I love playing this escapist feel so few titles get right, it's RoboCop Rogue City. Developers Teon built on their last game, Terminator Resistance, in every meaningful way, with one foot in something like the Xbox 360 era of action games, and the other providing a presentation that looks absolutely gorgeous. Josh, are you listening? Play RoboCop Rogue City.